How to Garden. This is Don. Don has a food for us I just walked around, took some nice pictures of, and we've got some video. I want Don here to tell you exactly what he has going on here.
Yes, we are what I call a ministry homestead down here in Vero Beach. And what we do down here is it's something very unique, I think, regarding permaculture and the body of Christ. We're involving church ministry, which is more about life, I think, than what we've created it to be. So what we do down here is we're bringing together the spiritual and the physical and putting these things together. And as I mentioned earlier, as we were walking through the food forest area, we talk about the peace of God. And what is peace? It's when you're at peace with your Creator, His creation, and each other. So there's this third element that comes in. People think it's enough if you're at peace with the one who made you and you're at peace with your fellow human beings. But when you're at peace with His creation, everything changes. It's totally redemptive. So what we've done down here, we've taken this field that we had here, I think just 4 years ago. It was just dry Bermuda grass, clay, sand. And by exercising simple stewardship practices over it, bringing a covering over it, we've created all this beautiful, amazing compost that we're now planting in. And it's producing this abundance. And we take that abundance and we leverage it. We can now reach over the fence and bless our neighbors. You'll have more food than you know what to do with. It's beautiful.
It's interesting. You brought up stewardship. That seems to be something that a lot of people don't seem to understand as they go through their general everyday life. You had mentioned earlier how a lot of people will just throw their trash on the ground. Now, that is something that a lot of people over the last generation have made a big effort to be able to not do that. I mean, we now have trash cans everywhere. Everybody recycles everything. But you're talking about permaculture here, and that kind of takes everything a lot further. Now, you've got a couple of acres that you put this for. Do you think it's something that people be able to do in their backyard?
Absolutely. What we did when we started, I knew I was in trouble looking at the soil profile out here. So we tried to figure out what can we do to redeem the property so we could grow in it. And what I ended up doing is calling every tree company within a 50-mile radius. And finally we got a hold of Asplund locally. And what I discovered one day when I was at the dump, I was looking at the sign where they dump trash. These companies are paying $18 a ton to dump their wood mulch. And I'm thinking,
adds up fast.
Yeah, it adds up. Well, for Asplund it does. So I ended up contacting them and saying, listen, we've got this area where there's access. I think if anyone can do this, you could have a 1/4 acre, as long as you have access for the truck to get there. And just bring the load to you. They're saving $18 per truckload by dumping it here. So we finally got a hold of them, and they started bringing in literally hundreds of loads of wood chips. And we spread over 2 acres, 3
How
feet
deep?
of mulch.
3 feet?
3 feet.
That's quite a start. Most people, when they do mulch, they put down 4 to 6 inches. If you're lucky, you can talk them into doing 8 inches. 3 feet is phenomenal. How's the water retention working for you?
The water retention has been fantastic. What I noticed, Florida rain seasons can be brutal. There was a time we had over a month of rain, and out where the wood chips aren't, it was flooded. I had an area out in the grass. We had about 4 inches of water. Our French drains filled up. The property was absolutely soaked, wet. I walk out here, the wood chips had retained. We had a month, almost a continuous rainfall, about three years ago, and it absorbed everything.
Nice.
So what's beautiful, it's like a cistern. So it's taking that water, it's holding it, and then releasing it to what's underneath as needed. So what I noticed over time is that as this breaks down, it's making this amazing compost, but it's also amending the soil profile underneath where it's covered.
Very good. Now, when you're building systems like this, a lot of people want to talk about biodiversity. Now, that's becoming more and more important as time goes by. our ecosystems are starting to collapse, mostly due to our own activities, which is a real shame, and we're going to have to do something about that. How many types of plants do you think you've managed to pack in here?
Probably close to 100 varieties of different things.
Okay.
But we're not done.
Nowhere near done.
We're nowhere near done. In fact, we're at the infancy phase of this project. What I want to do is to bring in hundreds, not just fruiting trees. We want to bring in flowering plants, ornamentals, herbs, and we want to see happen as this sets up. You were talking about earlier. There's this whole exchange system underneath the soil profile where you've got plants exchanging nutrients through their root systems. So like you said, even taking care of the young, which is something I learned from you today. It's amazing.
Now, you've got about 100 or so different types of plants. Have you seen an increase in bird activity over here and
Yes.
other animals?
Yes, we've got animals are welcome. Birds are great for helping us manage some of the insects, that are here. We're seeing an ecosystem get established. And, in the beginning when we started this, it was all inputs. You're inputting everything, but over time, it takes on its own nature and its own character. So what excites me is to be able to take this land out here, bring it up to a level where it less and less and less needs my involvement. You still have to come out and prune and, certain things, but it's far less input over time.
Okay.
We're getting older, so.
Yeah, well, you're at the point where chop and drop is definitely a viable option. You're going to start crossing a threshold where it's going to become self-sufficient before too long. But how do you tie this into your ministry?
Oh my gosh, it's huge. Great question. I'm glad you asked. When God created the world, He rested on the seventh day. Then it tells you God planted a garden, and He put man in that garden. Man was to have dominion over the earth. So when God gave that command, dominion means to serve and to protect.
So a stewardship of the land, basically.
Absolutely. Adam had everything he needed to sustain an abundant life, to have health like you wouldn't believe, by simple stewardship of taking care of that environment where he was placed. And he was given it. There weren't 10 commandments. It wasn't a Moses. There was one tree God told man not to eat of. And in eating of that tree, God removed his covering from the man and the woman. So noticing they were naked, where did they grab the covering from? They grabbed it from the soil. They grabbed it from the leaves of a fig tree. And God's a jealous God. So what happened was, as a result of this, when God held Adam into account for disobeying that simple command, He didn't curse Adam. He says, Adam, cursed is the ground because of you, because you've done this thing. And He said, from the sweat of your brow, you'll eat of it all the days of your life. Where He was the Lord of the harvest now in this garden prior to this event, agriculture becomes very difficult. Because when God banished Adam from the Garden of Eden, where he had removed the covering of God in exchange for covering from the earth, man went out and began ripping the covering now off the earth. So this is where tilling the soil came in. Once man began tilling, mankind began to toil.
Interesting. In permaculture practices, tilling is one of the last things we want to do. We want to lay down a new covering on the soil every year.
Absolutely.
And that's basically what you're doing here, is every year you're laying down a new covering on the soil and you're protecting what's there before. So that ties in very interestingly. So, I was reading just a couple of days ago that they've been doing some studies out in the Midwest. Now we all know that's basically our breadbasket. They go out there and they till it every year. Now the whole key is to all of this is getting carbon in the soil. Their soil out there has less than 3% carbon left in it. To put that on perspective, that means it's 97% just mineral. And without the carbon, there's no life. Without life, we're not going to be able to grow anything. They just keep tilling it and keep tilling it. This is a different system, and
I think people forget soil is a living organism. And when man goes out and disturbs that, the sun now comes down and bakes the earth. It's killing all of the life that our plants need. And it's interesting because the scriptures tell us that the creation itself, everything you see here, is crying out for the full manifestation of the sons of God. Why? Because God's command for us were to be the caretakers, the protectors. And most of Christianity is, we've thrown that away. For example, less than 2% of our world population is providing the majority of our food supply. Less than 2%. Okay, so that's 1 point something. If you take that statistic by itself, okay, how many of those are people that of faith who believe in the Creator who made this?
Probably maybe 15%.
Of that. So that's 15% of 1%. So that's minuscule. We've walked away from our stewardship responsibility as mankind as a whole. Less than 2% of the entire world population. It's scary, but people are waking up, because what happened is where a lot of the people that believe in a creator God, right, in Christianity, we've walked away from our stewardship responsibility. That got picked up by a lot of the hippies, the anarchists, and the New Agers. And don't get me wrong, creation is so beautiful and so abundant and rich. You're almost tempted to serve this, to worship it. It's beautiful. But this is a resource and not a source. But in order to get the abundance of this, you have to, I think you got to go to the one who made it, make right with him, and just start taking care of it the simple way that he showed us how. And so we didn't know in the beginning how to do it, so I had to go to God for answers. I knew nothing. Never planted a garden my entire life. So I had to get advice. What do? Well, we got to put that covering back.
Okay.
That's where we started. And that's what has helped me to get this soil profile. Now to come out, plant all these different plants and different things. And we're also trying to bring in not just different varieties of fruiting trees, like a kind of a polyculture, but also some of the native plants as well.
All right.
And so
what made you decide to go with the food forest and the permaculture instead of what is nowadays considered traditional, where you just go in and you till up the soil, you throw some compost at it and a bunch of modern chemicals? Why'd you go this way versus that way?
One big reason is doing it this way is 100% redemptive. Whereas if you have farming practices that are using a lot of chemical fertilizers, what they're doing right now at an alarming rate, every year you have to add more. It's like a drug addict, okay? You start feeding it drugs, the plants become chemical dependent. Year after year you have to give more and more and more. And as you're doing that, you're killing the very life that's sustaining the life of that plant. So over time we end up with fields that are sterile. We've robbed them of all the nutrients, and they're packed full of chemicals.
Oh, wait here for a second. Are you saying that the plants can become addicted to the fertilizers like it's a drug?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's what they should have everything they need. If man was doing what he was supposed to do and putting that covering there, that plant would be at rest. Because as these systems establish, you get overstory trees. The trees drop their leaves every year. That breakdown should be an annual thing where the soil, God made everything to replenish. But what do? A lot of us, it's like mowing your lawn. You bag the grass cuttings, right? You're taking away what the lawn needs. And we substitute it with a chemical fertilizer.
And a lot of cities
but
I've encountered actually have an ordinance where you have to bag your grass clippings and put it out to the road.
Yes.
And then somebody comes by and picks it up and they take it to dump and they throw it away.
Mm-hmm. It's absolute insanity. And the lawns began with the European aristocracies.
Yes.
Everyone used to grow their own food. And again, this gets back to the Bible. The Bible is an agrarian book. Mankind's first act of rebellion against God was by eating. in a garden. And we use that redemptively. So as we grow things here, we bring it to a table and invite people to come and enjoy the abundance that's produced by simple stewardship. And it produces something magnificent. And it also creates relationships within a community. Something else that's been lost with agriculture.
Yeah, that's true. The way the agriculture is going now with the super farms, you got one person working 180 acres who sits in an air-conditioned cab on a tractor all day with a GPS telling him where to go, and he doesn't see him in person.
Well, his hands are on the steering wheel and they're not on the soil. So it's affected us in so many ways. Modern technology has given us more reasons not to interact with the earth and with each other. Air conditioning, for example. Down here in Florida, you can stay in your house rather than be out in a garden somewhere working where you can speak to your neighbors over the fence.
Well, if you're not in the shade in Florida in the summer,
you're gonna
need
fry
that air conditioning.
Absolutely.
But you've got a pretty nice shady oasis, so I would expect that in August you could at least be out here for most of the day without a big issue.
Not only most of the day, my input is not as heavy as when I started this, because what's happening is we've got this ecosystem now establishing itself, and so it takes less time, less effort. See, God knew when he created this that through our stewardship responsibility, as we get older, we don't have the same energy to output. But if we do it right at the beginning, man's involvement goes down as that goes up.
It's interesting. When we're younger, we've got all the energy and none of the knowledge, and when we're older,
we have all the knowledge
and none of the energy.
You got it. But you know what? God made nature to counteract that. There's a symbiosis to nature that's so beautiful. We intake oxygen, we exhale carbon dioxide, which the plants need to intake and bring oxygen out, which we need. And it's so profound. And I recently had discovered that you could take seeds, for example. These are practices that have been lost through the centuries, the secret knowledge. You could take a seed, put it under your tongue, 10 minutes before you plant it, and the seed will take the saliva as it soaks in, will code your DNA. So when you plant that seed, it'll uptake from the soil what's lacking in your body.
It also starts to break down the outer shell so that when it germinates easier and faster because their saliva is a mild digestive acid.
So you see the involvement of man and how important that is within the whole kingdom of God's creation, plants and trees and flowers and herbs. It's made to go together. And I think we've so walked away from it, we need to return. And I think what's happening now, I think the world is slowly waking up and we're coming full circle. I think people are returning to this now. We see wonderful, listen, I've been down to Florida for 6 years. We see fantastic things happening. You've got Pete Canaris out on the West Coast.
Yep.
I discovered him on YouTube, and he's just doing magnificent things.
Yeah, Pete's got a great farm going, and he's been putting in some really nice installs.
Do you know these people, they don't realize that they're doing God's work when they're out there establishing these
Well, I've met
ecosystems.
Pete, and I'm pretty sure he realizes it.
Well, he knows. I've run into him at different events, and we've had some interesting discussions. And but I love the fact that people are awakening to this, because I don't know if you've ever flown over the country, but if you get in a jet, fly out to California, half the nation is dry. You look down, it looks like dried riverbeds. We're losing soil at an alarming rate.
And the thing is, we could actually go into a lot of those areas with a little bit of effort and turn it into a great big savanna with little patches of forest, and truthfully it could be done in a generation. All it would really need is setting it up the right way, start collecting the rain that's there, being able to put in hardier plants to begin with as pioneer plants, and then let the system correct itself over time. Out in those areas, one of the best ways you can do that is actually just go out and cut holes on, as the hill and stuff goes down, you just dig a hole and put all the dirt on one side, and it'll collect that water and it'll send it right into the ground. And we could literally go out into those areas that are desert here and just turn it into a great savanna and a whole new fertile area,
Look at what they're doing in
but
Israel.
they don't do it.
Israel's doing amazing things right now with agriculture. I mean,
Yes.
it's really profound. See, I'm of this mindset that when God created everything, mankind should never be hungry. We shouldn't have areas of the world where people are starving. We have so many resources underneath our feet. The problem isn't this. The problem is this.
Yes.
I spent a month over in Africa. And over in Africa, what I saw over there, Glenn, I saw a soil profile like nothing you've ever seen. I mean, you could drop anything, something's got to grow. And when I left there, I discovered that 85% of the population over there is subsistence farming. They're importing almost that percentage of grain.
Yes.
And as I'm flying back home, I'm having a conversation with God on the jet. And I'm saying, Lord, what's going on with this? They have got the most abundant, rich soils you can imagine, and yet they're starving over there. It
Yep.
doesn't make sense. And God reminded me of Israel. He says, if you're disobedient, and if the soil of this isn't right, I don't care what you're standing on. He won't let it produce. Now here's an interesting point, because when I got back from Africa, I went over to Canada. And we were driving over in Kamloops. This is like the West Pacific Northwest, through this range of mountains, and there was a valley right in the center. And coming across the other side of the highway was literally a storm, a sandstorm. And I turned to the people that were with me and I said, how long has religion been encroaching on this region and drying things up? The car almost went off the road. They said, I perceive you're a prophet. How did you know? I didn't have any secret knowledge. If you look at the land, you can tell the spiritual condition of a region by looking at its land.
Well, if you do that here in the States, we're not in that good a shape.
We're not. And the thing is, the less involvement we have with our responsibility of taking care of things, it shows, it manifests physically. Again, we've got soil erosion going on at an alarming rate. We're losing a lot of our topsoils, but if we use these simple redemptive practices, what takes the earth 100 years to produce an inch of topsoil, we can produce feet of it within 3 or 4 years.
Yep. Oh, I've had quite a few people actually say statements to me along the lines of, why would you bother growing food or setting up a system like this when I can just go to the grocery store and get anything I need? And that is a general mentality that a lot of people have. Even people I know that are completely into nature, they want to be good stewards. When it actually comes down to pull, they all have the mentality of, let's go to the grocery store, versus being responsible for producing anything themselves. What would you say to those people?
Well, first of all, I'll say you just touched on the nucleus of what we're doing here. We're using stewardship over the earth to produce stuff. The average item on a dinner plate comes from about 1,500 miles from where we live. Maybe some of it is local grown. However, we have no involvement with it, okay? So when you go to Publix or a supermarket and you're bringing home food, it's on your plate, you're not thinking even about the life of what you're eating, okay? But when you steward the life of whether it's an animal or whether it's a plant, you're raising it, you're culling it, you're taking it to a table. And the table's like an altar. You're taking that life which you cultivated, took, and it's giving its life as you eat it for you so that you have yours. Meals now become something very profound. And when you pray over what you eat, you're thankful for it in a way you can't possibly understand if you don't have that involvement with what's there. So again, I think we're missing out on the significance, and things are very profound. But it's beautiful. God in the Bible chooses to express himself through feasts. Feasts involve food, okay? Where did the food come from? There wasn't a Publix back in biblical times.
Somebody had to grow it.
Everyone grew their own food. You know, even Israel, when they were in Babylon under exile, God told them, he said, listen, build a house and plant a garden. Look for the welfare of your community, and in it you'll find yours. You know what? If people would just do that, there's Christianity revealed right there. Caring for people, building lifelong relationships where by stewardship you're going to have abundance. You're going to have more than your family could eat. You could plant a garden along a walkway next to your house and produce so much.
Gardening, small spaces can be quite impressive. You can get a lot out of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Is there any other places out here you want to show me?
Sure. We've got a greenhouse project we're setting up now over there, and I'll introduce you to our chickens, which are our compost team.
Awesome.
We're not going to cull our chickens. Our chickens are going to have nice long lives, and eventually they'll become compost. But it's through the natural order of things, and through death comes life, and that preaches. Believe me. I think this whole world is created to be an example of the one who made it. And if you just look at nature, you can't deny the existence of a magnificent creator who made it so beautifully. And when you simply treat it the way he wants you to, it can't do anything but produce. It's beautiful.
Awesome. Great talking with you.
Great talking with you.
Let's go take a look at some of the other stuff.
Sounds good. Let's go.